We've talked about how you don't want to have a whole bunch of system tests at the top of your test pyramid, making it an ice cream cone. And we've talked about the fact that even when these system tests are relatively well put together, they break a lot. So now I'm going to show you how to create system tests that are prone to breaking a lot using the Selenium IDE. That's a little test automation humor. Really what we're trying to do here is three things. One, show you an example of what these system tests actually look like so you know. Two, I'm going to show you how to create them using this Selenium IDE thing, which is really easy to pick up and start playing with, kind of regardless of your background. And then three, I'm going to show you some of the reasons why these tests might tend to break sometimes. And that'll give you more of an intuition about why your tests might be breaking that you can bring to help, bring more perspective to your testing. Which is a lot of what this course is about. So what I've done is I've taken the code, the same basic code from HVAC and Hurry, and I've ported it to a WordPress site. And kind of sparing you the details, the reason I did that is because of the way that the JS Fiddle presents things in these different areas and that they look like these different frames to the browser, and that kind of necessitates a bunch of workarounds with this scripting that we don't want to deal with. So this is here on the public internet at hvacandhurry.com. And I thought I'd show you the Selenium page. So this is this Selenium HQ, this project page for the Selenium stuff. And they have two things. This WebDriver, which is a thing that they recommend using for real sort of building of browser-based regression system tests. And it's actually a component of a lot of other tools like Nightwatch.js that's for a more specialized thing for JavaScript testing. And then they have the Selenium IDE, which is really great for tinkering with. And that they kind of say that here. This is good for tinkering, creating scripts, exploratory testing, stuff like that. So you kind of see this idea mirrored in the way that they describe these different tools. Now, if you actually want to get the Selenium IDE, Integrated Development Environment is the abbreviation, it's a browser plugin for either Firefox or Chrome. So I would Google Selenium. I am not searching. This is the autocomplete for Google. In case you didn't know, I wasn't searching for Selena Gomez, though I'm sure she's very talented. So Selenium IDE Chrome would be like what you would want to search for. For example, you'll come to this link on the Chrome store. I've already got it. Or go find the equivalent thing for Firefox, because this is, again, these browsers run their own little app stores, and that's where you would get this Selenium thing. So with that said, let's dive in and create a system test. What I'm going to record is this registration interaction that we've been playing with in the other types of tests, and that's to give you kind of the contrast between these. So to get started, I click on this Selenium IDE button. I'm going to make this thing a little bit smaller. I click Start Record, and that's the idea with this thing, is it just records what you do on the web page. So record, and then I'm going to say, okay, first I will click this login button. It's telling me that it's recording. Then I'm going to say, okay, I want to register. And then I have copied the parameters into a text file, so you don't have to watch me type. I'm going to type in an email, and I'm going to type in a set of passwords. And I'm going to click this register button. Ta-da! Okay, and then what should happen is that the user is logged in and they're redirected back to this page. It says logout. So I'll just test for this logout thing, because that's the main thing, let's say, we want to make sure of. And I can right click or two finger click on the element, and then I can go to this Selenium IDE menu that's now in my my right click menu and say assert text, this idea of saying I think the text should be X, and the Selenium IDE will record that this text is seeing what it's saying right now, and that's the assertion that we're making. If I go back to the Selenium IDE now, I'm going to click stop recording, and I'm going to take a look at what it did. So there are all these, there are these 9 various commands that it's issued, and they have the command itself, like open a page or click on something, a target, which is the page element that they're gonna address, and then a value, which isn't particularly relevant in all cases. It's most obviously relevant in cases like this, where we say, well, I'll type into this place this parameter here, like the user ID that we're going to use. or the passwords. And then these values here, this click at command has a coordinate that it'll take to help you kind of zero in on the item. It's not super necessary on this page. Like if you delete it, this whole thing will still work, but it can be more relevant in certain other environments. So here we are, we have this. Now, a good thing to start with is to just go ahead and make sure that this actually works. So what I'm gonna do, since this is we're sort of playing around in a real test suite, you'd want this to loop through, delete the user it created, bring you back to your sort of initial state so that it could be rerun again. And that, with any testing, particularly where data is involved, that's what you'd want to do. But I am going to, since we're just kind of tinkering around here, I'm just going to increment this to 64. Otherwise, of course, the test would fail. And I'm going to run this again by pressing this play button. And I'm going to make sure it works. I will also log this user out and go back to the home page. It's not strictly necessary in this scenario, but that's generally, you'd want to make sure you're in the same initial state as a general practice. So I went ahead and did that. All right, so we're going to press play. We're just going to see if this works. So you can see it kind of running through, putting in all these parameters, and oh, there's an error. And what is that error? That might be really interesting. Okay, so it says assert text log out. And I have to bring this panel up to see the log here. Failed. Actual value log in, which is what this thing said, did not match the value log out. Well, what I think happened there was that it moved faster than the page refreshing itself and transitioning from log in to log out, if that makes sense. So, and this is totally a thing that will happen on these system tests, very common kind of problem. So what I'm gonna do to work around that is I'm gonna right click, insert, or two finger click, insert new command. There's actually a command called pause that I can add here. And it's gonna take a value in milliseconds. So I'm gonna say pause for 2 seconds, 2000 milliseconds. I'm gonna have to increment this again, right? Otherwise it'll fail with the duplicate. And I'm gonna log this out, go to home, and let's give it another whirl. Very common that you may need to tinker with this a couple times to get it working. So I'm gonna move this so you can see it doing its thing. We're gonna click play. We're gonna observe what happens. Nope, so far so good. Register, doop, pop, pause, assert text, and see now it works. Very typical example of a thing that'll break. And let's look at a few of these things in a little bit more detail. So this command click at is, this is pretty good. If you're not familiar with CSS, it is a way of attaching formatting to HTML elements. And HTML is the sort of body of elements on the web, and they're basically all these set of elements that are in tags. Like, for example, this element here, log out. This is, let's see what this is. I'm going to click inspect here. If you're not familiar with this, this is a thing that Chrome and pretty much all browsers do, I think. And so what this is saying is that our element here is a li, and which is a thing that appears in unordered lists. UL stands for unordered lists, and the list items are in here. All these various things in the nav. It's a pretty typical way to lay out a nav. So this thing has the ID. You can see where it says ID here. Menu item 107. And I actually would say that, and then our actual title here is an A element inside of that. It's nested inside of it. A stands for anchor link, and that's basically a link. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this CSS syntax to actually make this typing more robust. So if you're not familiar with HTML and CSS, some of this may not make a ton of sense, but I'm going to basically, instead of saying title ... which is in fact the title that this link has, but that's weird that it just says ... It's not very specific. I think what happened is this nav is generated by the WordPress theme, a part of WordPress, and I think if it goes over a certain length, it just says ... You can see, for example, these other ones that are shorter, say help and home. But ... is not a very specific way of identifying something. If the theme changes or this thing changes, it seems like it really could break. The ID is going to be a little bit more persistent. So I'm going to go in here, and this hash symbol is the symbol to identify an ID. And CSS. And then this greater than sign is a thing that says, now go find the child, the nested element of this thing, which was an A, we said. And so I think this is a little bit better way to identify this element. And that's, experts at Selenium testing might disagree with me, but I think that this is an example of more tightly typing something. And I would say that this is a bit better. So here we are with this. What I'm going to do now is make sure that that actually works. But I'm going to wait because we're going to break something, and I'll just do this all at one time so this doesn't run too long. All right. So let's take a look at a few of these other things. These are clicks. These are being identified by ID. This is saying, okay, this element, these things going, that all looks pretty good. And this says click at register form, which is an ID on the page. And it says button.auth button. So what that means is there's a button that has the class of auth button. That's, some people might want to change that, but I think that seems reasonable. Pause we put in, and then make sure that this text says this. Now, what I'll do is I'll just copy, I'm going to go here, and I'm going to copy the way that we identified that target into this item here, this argument, so that we're doing the same thing. Now, you might have noticed that this thing says log out in all caps. What would happen if we, for example, we just were in here and we're like, well, it says log out. It's actually going to break because this, that'd be a reasonable thing to do if you were just sort of looking at the page visually. But the actual item on the page, which is what the Selenium is going to look for, is it says capital L, capital O log out, not all caps. And we're using CSS styling to say, actually make those words upper, which isn't what the Selenium thing is going to look for. Very nuanced, but very much something that will break this. So I'm going to increment this thing again so it doesn't break to 66. And I'm going to run this again. And you'll see two things. You'll see this working, and you'll see this failing because this subtle change of making these all caps is going to break this. It's an example of stuff that might break these things. So I'll move this. Here we are. We're doing automation. Register. All right. Oop. Transition. We pause. The logout appears, and it fails. And let's see why it says that it failed in the log down here. Actual value logout did not match all caps logout. Okay, so that's an example of why this stuff might fail. If you want to tinker with the Selenium IDE, I think you'll find it really easy to get started. However, if you start to hit issues like this and you're like, well, I don't understand what all this CSS stuff is and why it's breaking, I would just take a pause because that's an accurate statement. And probably if you're interested in really learning how to do this type of work, what I would start with is just learning the fundamentals of HTML and CSS. And there's a page that'll come up here that you can see. This software design class that I teach at UVA Darden is the syllabus page for that has a lot of resources that you might find handy, some sample code also on JS Fiddle, some tutorials and things like that. And those are things that I would learn a little bit about, and then you can write Selenium tests, write them for whatever site you want, right? It doesn't matter if it's your software or somebody else's if you want to practice and develop this skill. And then ultimately you'll want to work with your developers on what do we want to system test, how do we want to system test it. You may find that one of these more specialized tools makes more sense for your particular environment. You may need to learn a little bit of JavaScript, but those are some notes about how this testing generally kind of works and things that you may find that you need to tinker with to make it work better.